I'm right before the Civil War. I've been about 1860 in this story. It's extraordinary, the sad, miserable life that this man led, the depression that inflicted him, how he was in these outposts and all he wanted was to be with his wife and his children. He was seen as a Slav, slovenly, a drunkard. And yet, time and time again, everybody that knew Grant said he had the effect of being the guy that was slouched in the corner, and then when you needed somebody to show more strength and more character and more power and more grit than anybody else, suddenly this man transformed. I mean, he and Lincoln saved our Union. But what you look at both of these men who had lives of failures, and isn't it remarkable, I will say this, that's who God chose to lead our country through its most difficult time, these two simple men.
It's one of the things that if you believe in providence, or if you just want to think of it as fate, it's one of the most remarkable things. Lincoln was no one's choice to be a savior. As you say, and as Ron Chernow writes, and one of the great American stories is that Ulysses Grant, who couldn't stand the smell of blood in his father's tannery, was selling firewood on the streets of St. Louis with 2 years or so before he became the most important general, arguably, certainly in the modern era.
Kicked out of the Army, John. Kicked out of the United States Army, forced to resign. He's selling firewood on the streets of St. Louis. He's seen as an abject failure. And when Abraham Lincoln can't find a general to use their troops to win the war, this man, who again also wouldn't even go hunting because he hated the thought of killing living beings, went and did what it took to win that war.
Right. And there has been something remarkable in the American experience, that we have managed to find the people we needed at the moments we most needed them. And whether it's Washington, who was able to overcome the doubts of the framers about the presidency, one of the reasons they were willing to leave that ambiguity in the office is they knew they were looking at the first president in the room there in Philadelphia with them, and they were willing to trust him to do it. Same with Lincoln. I'd argue same with Franklin Roosevelt. In many ways the same with Ronald Reagan and so many others. That's the mystery of history. And people can accuse us, and I'm sure they will, of being sentimental or hokey. But as a clinical fact of history, these flawed leaders at difficult moments have come to power and have led us and brought us to a better place than we were before. That's an observable fact.
Well, and Mike, the same thing happened in, in Britain, 1940. Winston Churchill was just perceived as a disaster by most of the establishment. And John and I always joke about the saying that was around London about Winston Churchill. When he's right, but when he's wrong, my God. And yet the man saved civilization.
And I would submit that there is a common thread to everything that you have said about leaders and everything that John Meacham has just said about leaders, and it is this: that they arrive like a miracle, like a flash of sunlight on a stormy day in this country. And they are, almost to a person, people who understand several elements of life that affect everyone who is normal in this country. They understand loss. They understand what it's like to be hurt, to be damaged within their own lives, within the frameworks of their own existence. Peggy, I don't know about you, but there is just this common thread that has stood out to me for years now, thinking about all the great people who have led us. Lincoln, Grant, FDR, Jack Kennedy to a certain extent. They've all suffered losses that before they arrived on the scene to minister to this country. And oh my God, do we need someone like that today.
Yeah.
Peggy,
yes.
thank you.
To say the least.
Well said.
Hey, could I just say for a second, John Meacham the other morning when Billy Graham died, when nobody knew he was going to die, and John came on, and he was really
incredible.
Quite beautiful,
Yeah.
encompassing the guy, the moment, the career. As for what we're talking about, I have noticed in history sometimes people can tool along in obscurity until a disaster happens, and they have within them the exact talents for disaster, to meet disaster, and you never would have heard of them if the disaster hadn't come. But somehow their gifts, previously unknown, and the disaster come. You know, it's an interesting thing. There's an old saying, the hero comes when he is needed. When our belief gets pale and weak, there comes a man out of that need who is bright and shining, and everyone around him reflects some of that glow and stores some up against the day that he is gone. Isn't that pretty? A hero comes from need.
A hero comes from need, and I do believe in God's providence over this country. I always have, and I always will. And I've just read too much history. I've read too many stories about people like General Grant, who rises to become President Grant, who takes us through Reconstruction, and as Frederick Douglass said, did more to liberate black Americans than anybody other than Lincoln.
That's in the Chernow book, very much.
That's why we have to teach our children that we have, yes, we have dysfunction in this country today, but we've had 240 years of exceptionalism. We have made so many mistakes, and yet we've lifted ourselves up, we've dusted ourselves off, and we have, though it's been an uneven path, we have continued down the path of justice.
A hero